hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard.
You don't end up in a yoga class just because like everything is fine and dandy and life is amazing and you're like, I just need some soul searching, shifting thing I'm gonna do till I die. Like usually we show up when some shit is a little bit unhinged. If you're ever like an athlete at any medium high level, there's a point when you try to figure out, who am I without this? I was really struggling with a really toxic relationship to the gym and to fitness. My head was a mess. You know, I had a really bad eating disorder. I was on the treadmill till I could hit 1,000 calories. I had some real spirals halfway across the world, you know, in hotel rooms by myself, wondering, shit, is anyone going to show up?
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Love at First Science, and a very special warm welcome to Carling Harps. I can't believe you're here with me at last.
I'm so happy to finally be here and talk to you and see your pretty face.
Yeah, likewise. I've been following you for so long and just seeing your name on the circuit, and oh, goodness, it's just wonderful that I finally have connected with you, in a deeper meaning, like now we're connecting through this conversation, but also like we've been exchanging little messages, and I always get so happy when I see you on my feed. And so I guess a great starting point for us would be to talk about you and your journey, because I think a lot of people would want to know that listen to this podcast, because you originally started as an athlete, didn't you?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in team sports and competitive sports, and I don't want to like oversell myself that I was an amazing scholarship athlete, but I did like love the community, the camaraderie, the fun of it, and I just happened to be like pretty decent at things. And so, you know, I spent most of my life in competitive sports, but my like real deep first love was cheerleading, which broke my father's heart, but like competitive cheerleading. And I cheered at the University of Washington, which is a D1 school here. And like, for me, that was the thing that was like, you know, I don't know. I never knew what the plan was with it. I just knew that I loved it and it felt good. And it was like this big experience that I do feel like really brought me out of my shell growing up. So for me, that was my like real deep athlete. And I've always just been like a big fan. I have an older brother. I grew up watching sports. So it's always been in my universe, in my psyche.
Amazing. And you started quite young, right? How old were you when you actually went into this world of sports and training?
Oh God. I mean, I think I've done things forever, but it was like I said, I've always been a very like casual person about it. I would consider myself like middle of the bell curve always. Like I could make every team, I could maybe start, but I was never going to be MVP. But I was always, probably from like day one as a young child, I was always going to be like I don't know, like the most charismatic, most likely to show up for everything. She's always here. She wants to play, like that person. She knows every dance. She knows every play. So, you know, it's part of sports. And like that has always just been something that I was drawn to. Like as a kid, I danced a little bit and, you know, soccer and all that. It was really just an excuse to be with my friends and move my body. And I didn't know why it felt good or why I needed to, but I did, which feels like exactly the same as who I am as an adult. It's just an excuse to be with my friends and move my body and, you know, get the endorphins where they need to be.
Amazing. Because there's that great quote, hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard. And I feel like watching you and listening to you now speaking, you've just been that super dedicated person. You know what you love. And when there's something you like, you just go for it, all guns blazing.
Mm-hmm. It's so true. And growing up like that, I also, you know, you have moments of like little bit of spitefulness for those people that are uber talented. Like they're just so good and they don't care. And they don't need to care. They don't have to. But as a person who cares a lot, I'd always be like, man, what's it like to just like effortlessly do it, you know? But there's something to be said. And I do think it actually has led me to be a really skillful teacher is when you have to work hard, you have to learn the steps. Like, excuse me, you have to go through piece by piece. It's not just I don't know, just do it. You know, you really have to break it down and like deconstruct to reconstruct. And I do think that that is part of what I love about teaching, and it makes sense why.
That's why you're so good at teaching as well. That's why one of the things that drew me to you was just what an excellent communicator you are. Like when I was listening to the way you were teaching on some of the posts, I was like, oh, wow. Like when you have a thought in your head, you know how to get it out and into someone's mind in the clearest, quickest, most succinct, beautiful way. And I remember, like to that point, I remember going to a class once and there was this amazing teacher. Like, honestly, I had so much respect for him, but he could do handstand press very easily. And I was desperate to learn. And I went up to him really humble. I was like, please, please, can you teach me the steps? And he was like, you must use your breath. I was like, is that all you're going to say? Like, surely there's more.
That's it? You're like, that's it, so I'll have it tomorrow? Okay, thank you.
I'm like really breathing here, man. Come on.
Yeah.
And then I know that yoga came into your life in a tough time, and I was wondering if you'd be open to sharing that.
Sure. Yeah, I find it funny because I think for a lot of people, like our yoga origin story, like it's usually you don't end up in a yoga class just because like everything is fine and dandy and life is amazing. And you're like, I just need some soul searching, shifting thing I'm going to do till I die. Like usually we show up when some shit is a little bit unhinged, right? Or we finally have that yearning that you're like, I should do something, or I don't know what I'm doing, but for some reason I'm called to this. So like in the same vein of growing up as the competitive cheerleader and being really in love with that path, there's a point in, I think this resonates if you were ever like an athlete at any medium high level. There's a point when you try to figure out, who am I without this? Like, that like, what was I wasn't going to be a professional cheerleader. And, it's even harder than like the path of like, am I going to go from D1 to play pro, things like that. You have this identity crisis of like, I have no idea what I am without this. And that was very challenging for me in college when I stopped cheering, and I was really struggling with a really toxic relationship to the gym and to fitness. Again, cheerleading is lovely, but it's not the healthiest dynamic from a mental and from just like a societal perspective. Like in general, the way that we speak to women and the pressures we put on them with their body is a problem, but it's really a problem in those types of sports. And so my head was a mess. I had a really bad eating disorder. I was on the treadmill till I could hit 1,000 calories. Like it was not my finest season. And also it's just like, it's tough being 20. It's tough. Those are eras where you just like, you're seeking and you don't even know that you're seeking. And so for me, my dad would encourage me to go to yoga, and I was like, okay, sure, Dad. Yeah, I'll try it. And I didn't know how to do anything because I'd never done anything that wasn't external. I'd never done anything that wasn't to win or to look better or to be better. I'd never even considered the fact that I would just do something and move my body and it would be not about any of that. So I started with Bikram. I started with hot yoga. Like I went with a friend. My roommate finally talked me into it. And I remember my ego a little bit being like, oh, I could be good at this. Like this could, you know what I mean? Like it was like, this makes sense for me. And then like 2 seconds later realizing like no one gave any shits if I was good at it. Like it didn't matter. And that was so freeing. Like it was this whole new window that I had no idea. I don't know. It just was like very liberating, and it still took a while to unravel all the other stuff, of course. But, it is a very interesting discipline. And I think it's part of why you see a lot of people from athletics or even people with like addiction backgrounds end up in yoga, because it fills this gap that you've spent your whole life trying to fill with other stuff.
I feel like you're still a bit like that now. I think maybe there was a time where you cared about how good you were, but I feel like that experience, you're not like that at all now. I don't get that vibe from you that you care about what people think or that you care about climbing some kind of imaginary ladder. I feel like you've totally dropped that. It's so nice that that's happened for you.
I've definitely had seasons. Like, I mean, I would say like the middle of my yoga journey, especially when, Patrick, who is my ex and my teaching partner and my business partner and co-parent, and like has very much been like, we've raised each other. We met when we were 22, like we've grown each other up. But there were phases in that, no matter how comfortable you are with someone or no matter how secure you are in your job, like there's still a dynamic of like, ooh, am I good enough at this? Like, do I deserve to be here? Right. And so I definitely have had a lot of eras of, sitting in the car in tears before a workshop, wondering like, am I supposed to be doing this? Am I good at this? Does this matter? Does anyone care? And those are really hard. A lot of it for me has always been more about the craft of teaching and not the physical practice. But that stuff is tough. I think now at 37 and as a single mom, like I could care really less, and I feel very secure and confident in what I do and, how I practice. But absolutely seasons of it. Sometimes it takes, a lot to get through. And I think we all dip in and out of it for sure.
Yeah, and I know there's like, I'm trying to decide which way to take this, because first thing I want to say is obviously that's how I always heard about your name. you were Patrick and Carling traveling around the world, and you came to London a few times. But I'm always the type of person that, if organically, like maybe we're at a festival and we bump into each other, and I'm like, oh, they're nice, or someone introduces us, or someone goes, oh, do you know what? I went to that training. Was I feel like if there's some kind of connection, I'm really drawn to people. But if it's just random and everyone's like, oh, just follow because of the numbers, I tend to like take a bit longer to kind of warm up. And so you guys were just these people that I knew of. And I just always had so much respect for the fact that you guys as a team went around and you supported each other. And I really admired that. I thought that was very cool. But never kind of dabbled. But then a really good friend did your training. And then I was like, oh, wow. And then I started following you first, obviously. And I was like, this woman can communicate, as I mentioned before, like so clear. And I was so inspired by the way that you articulate yourself. And that's kind of circling back now to the other thing that I wanted to ask you about, was this world of traveling and teaching, where I first heard about you, because that I can imagine had some epic highs, wonderful experiences, which you would carry in your heart forever. But having traveled a little bit, hardly at all compared to you guys, by the way, but there are some epic lows that come with that world. And I don't think a lot of teachers realize that, So yeah, I just thought it would be cool to hear your story more.
Yeah, I mean, it's so true. Like it is a lot like the yoga practice, right? It is not all sunshine and rainbows, and it's just the reality of it. So like the travel for Patrick and I, we really we went all in. And to be 100% honest, it was never me that was like, let's go all in, like put our shit in storage, let's go. I am a person who I generally exist like in my head, which is why I need athletics and sports and lifting heavy things to get out of my head and into my body. But I, with the travel, would do exactly that. I would have these epic highs, the most unbelievable experiences that truly there's no other version of life that I could imagine wanting. And I had some real spirals halfway across the world, in hotel rooms by myself, wondering, shit, is anyone going to show up? Right. And I think that is the thing that with travel teaching, we put it on this pedestal as that's the thing you want to do as a teacher. That's the ultimate goal of, working through what it's to be a yoga teacher beyond the local scale. And while, yeah, it was definitely a vision that we had devised and worked really hard towards, there's also some realities of we taught a lot of workshops to 2 people, and we taught a lot of workshops in places that were, we would never go back to, not a location, but just the entire experience. It's 16 flights and it took you 12 days to get there, and you're in the middle of nowhere and you're like, fuck, this was a lot. It's hard, right? So you have that, and then you have, one weekend, one gig later, you're teaching in front of 1,000 people in the middle of the biggest street in Singapore. It was I would say that for people whose job is to help people regulate their nervous system, my nervous system was so fucked during all of the travel that it really is this just beautiful and chaotic experience. And for us, for Patrick, it's very much what he thrives on. He's like a stand-up comedian. He could go out there every night and do every set time from 8 p.m. to 1 a.m. and be so happy. That is his joy. And I'm that's amazing. For me, my battery gets depleted faster, and I know my limits a lot better. I didn't back then, but I do really now know how much travel, how much teaching, especially with a daughter, that I want to always be balanced. I don't want to be away as much anymore. So that part was the hardest part about traveling. It's a high demand, and you gotta, when you teach trainings, it doesn't matter if you had a bad day. It doesn't matter if you didn't sleep. It doesn't matter if you got in a fight with your partner. It doesn't matter if anything happened. You have to really turn it on. You have to show up, and you have to be articulate. And our job is funny. What we do, it's public opinion, and it's performance, and it's academic, and it's physical. You're demoing, it is a lot happening. And I definitely think, it takes a lot of work to figure out how to navigate it and stay in balance while you do it. I don't know if you've had a similar sensation with workshops and big events where it's just
the show must go on. The show must go on. And also, I'm positive you feel the same way, but I feel so deeply touched that people have given up their time and their money to do something that I have to share. It really moves me. And so in the moments where all I want to do is just go to sleep because it's been like 3 nights of no sleep and like hours of screen time preparing the slides and getting all the workshop details like minute. I know we're both preparers.
Yes, totally.
I get into this like real anxiety almost. I wish I wasn't that person, but I just am. And yeah, you've just got to show up and do your best. There's no way
Mm-hmm.
out.
No, and I think for me, a lot of times too, like those seasons of being more unsure of myself, part of it I do think is age. And it's like the thing that you just don't know till you know, right? You don't have any reference of what's coming next or that it's not going to feel like that forever. But, part of it is also finding, at least for me, it was finding like my niche, my purpose, the thing that really felt like me within it all. Like when you very astutely notice that you're like, you don't really care about some of the physical goalposts. And I don't. And I know it used to drive Patrick insane because I was like, I don't care. I'm good. Like once I could figure out handstand and some fun transitions, I was like, I love it. I enjoy the practice, but I don't care about pressing. I don't care about the things. You got that box ticked. We're good. I'm going to go read a book. I'm going to go take an online course because what I really love is like the learning, the teacher training, the like minutia,
Amazing.
the breakdown, like the really ADHD, like hyperfixation stuff. That is what took my panic attacks before a big workshop. Like when I would have to demo in front of 100 people, I would have to do affirmations to myself on the mat halfway through a workshop. Like, you got an hour left. You are safe. You are okay. Like, you can fucking do this. Once I shifted to like, teacher trainings and running my own workshops and being the breakdown person, suddenly a lot of that lifted because I was like, oh, I'm in my bag. Like, this is what I do. I know this stuff. I get it. I really care. I'm so passionate. You can't shut me up. Like, then a lot of that stuff slipped away. And now these days, I used to need like an hour before a workshop of like, no one talk to me. I need to be in my slides, focus. Now I could have a conversation with like the person I'm dating 5 minutes before I walk on and my brain works. And it really, I do think has a lot to do with knowing and deeply caring about what you're teaching in a less performative way and more of a like, I got to get this out of me. I got to share it because that's how excited I am about it. That just made such a difference in my whole demeanor about teaching.
It just shows like, yeah, because I guess when you were first teaching and traveling and teaching workshops all around the world and people were signing up for the handstands and the back bends and all that jazz, like because that was one type of moment and then things have evolved. Can you walk us through that evolution?
Oh yeah. I mean, I'm sure you've seen it in the industry. You've been in this for so long too, that like the moment of handstands and like that type of practice was so big. And yoga had this like expansive moment on social media too, which I'm very lucky to have like timed those things very unintentionally well, that portion was fun. And I like that in my personal practice, but the pressure of teaching that stuff, I can turn it on forever. It's where the cheerleading has really come in handy. I can, fake it till you make it. And I don't mean that I'm faking doing it. It's just like, I can be okay and figure it out. Right. And that season of teaching in yoga, really fun. But I do think there's been this evolution where people have shifted to like, well, I want to know more. Give me the why. Like we seem to be so out of the phase of guru said so, teacher said so. And certain lineages, of course, that will always exist. And it's not a comment on whether or not
It's
it should
still
or shouldn't.
alive and well in many places.
I know in
Jesus.
London too. It's more alive and well in London than it is a lot of places in the States.
I don't understand it.
It's funny because I know you're the same. I'm going to make an assumption. Like, I'm a person that runs on curiosity. Like,
100%. I need to know.
I can't sleep. I need to know. I'm going to be on Reddit till 4 a.m. I need to know, right? Like, that's my lifeblood is curiosity and passion. Like, it's hard for me to understand the other side of it, but I do think there's something very safe and secure about the structure of lineage of like, you don't have to ask questions. You don't have to like, maybe if your life is full
it doesn't
of
sit right
decision
with me
fatigue-
though. I can't.
No,
I
it
can't
doesn't
be
do
okay
it
with
for me. There's times in my life where I'm like, I'm fried and someone just tell me what to do. Or there's like pieces of my life. What I
That
love
now
a
watch
training
Friends
program.
on TV.
Yeah.
Like that's
Or
how
I
I get
wanna go
by
to-
in those moments.
I need, there's some structure that's really important to me. Like in Awakening Yoga, which is the style that I teach, and it's Patrick and I's yoga school. Like we have one of our principal tenets is freedom and structure. And like in theory, every class should contain both. You should have moments where the students can move and have a release from you telling them what to do and that type of catharsis. And you should have moments where you are a safe container and there are boundaries and you don't have to make a single decision and let me walk you through this and hold your hand. And like that dichotomy, I think, is so important in every individual class, but also like in your approach to the practice and life as a whole. Like, too much freedom and you're like blowing in the wind, right? You're like just a pile of goo, or you're like, I don't know where I am. It feels so scary. You just want someone to hold you and tell you what to do and like swaddle you in a blanket. And too much structure and you're like, get me the fuck out of here. I'm going to break down these walls. You're boxed in. So I think my hope is always that like there's a place in the industry for both, which is what I'm trying to do. But I think it makes sense that there's, people have such dispositions. There seems to be a real specific archetype of person that is still showing up, and really, really diving into an ongoing 40 years of Mysore every single morning at 6 a.m.
Oh, it's so powerful. Like people absolutely love it. It's very hard for me to understand it because I'm so creative and I love to just move my body. But also the thing that I've been noticing happening both in the yoga world and even in the movement world is that we have entered into almost a codependent relationship with the people who are teaching us, where we aren't able to make informed decisions about our own bodies and what feels good for us, even within a class setting, because the teacher will take offense to us moving in the way we choose to. It's like damaging for their, I want to say ego. I don't even think it's not even that negative. It's just that they care to keep you safe. And what they don't recognize is actually it's even more unsafe, because then people feel fear for just moving their bodies without someone observing them, checking their form and making sure they do everything in right angles in the perfect way.
Oh, I completely agree. It's one thing that is so challenging for me, like with the intersection of, like the kind of like rise of alignment yoga all through yoga works and all of that. And this like infusion of what we have misconstrued alignment to be like anatomical, alignment to be biomechanics, alignment to equal safety, which I think the one thing that is really hard is, then people equate alignment with safety. And then when things don't work, when someone gets hurt, when inevitably like shit goes awry, and oftentimes it has very little to do with what happened in that 1 hour of your day in class, and much more to do with the other 23 hours, the last 49 years of your life, like the sports you played when you were a kid, like me. All of those things feed into it, the pattern, the way you walk, the way you sleep. Like yoga, I have a hard time with the like yoga as injurious discussion, because it makes me laugh. I'm like, have y'all been to a commercial gym? Have you watched someone do push-ups in the park? I am not worried about your chaturanga. Like, have you seen Gen Pop? And not in a mean way, like, but we're so stressed about this. And I think it's because we also see yoga as this spiritual healing, well-being discipline that we think it could never have any faults. It could never falter. It can't fail us. So when we get hurt, we feel like the whole thing has failed us or we've done it wrong. And as teachers,
Well, we tend to blame ourselves or our teachers or or a specific part of the practice and the form.
Yes.
And it's great marketing. Let's be honest. People have made a lot of money saying there's only one right way to do chaturanga. I mean, that especially certain communities, I say this with love, my German friends, but you guys love being told what is right and what is wrong. And there is no right and wrong. I wish there was a better way of
I make
getting
everyone
that
so
to
mad.
be
My
marketed.
answer to everything is it depends. And people are like, okay, I hear you. However, am I doing this right? And I'm like,
Yeah, exactly.
It's just, and as teachers, you want to soothe people's souls. You want to say, yes, you're right. Yes, you're safe. And I think as a teacher, like I really try, if I'm in charge of the marketing, I would never market my classes as safe. Like I can't control that. That's such a lie. It's a false promise. I can't control what happens in your body, and I can do my best to provide a container and offer all of the ways that I have seen this work best and my advice on patterns and my expertise. But at the end of the day, it's also why, like you said, I really care what people do in my classes. Like I'm particular. I'm a stickler. I'm going to ask you because I'm curious. I'm going to be like, what's this all about? Tell me about what's happening like in this pose or with your left hip, or like, why are you doing it this way? Or why'd you choose? Because to me, that's just more data points. Like, oh, you're doing it this way because you have this old labrum tear and that's interesting. So this works for you. Like I'm putting that in my, in my Rolodex for later because I'm curious, but I don't, you're doing you, it's your practice. And that's ultimately the goal. What audacity do I have to say I can keep you safe? Like the ego that must take from me to think that I am in charge or I can control what's happening there because I offered, a few alignment cues in Warrior 2 is like, nah, man, I that's just, that's so, the audacity. It's hard for me to
Oh,
wrap my head. I definitely had a phase. I had a moment in my teaching where I
oh
firmly
yeah, we
believed
we
in that. We
were
all,
both there, mate. Come on.
it's like you got to learn the rules to break them a little bit, you know?
Totally.
It's a part of all of our pasts.
I know that one of the big things that your training, this is obviously, I was having a chat with Katrina, who did your training, and I was like, okay, tell me what the good things are. Tell me, what did you love? And she said, what were the most empowering parts of the training that she did with you guys was how you adapt the practice to suit lots of different types of bodies. And my brain was suddenly lit up like a Christmas tree thinking, thank you. Someone out there recognizes that can't all do things in the same way every time. And one of the examples that she gave was, instead of stepping to the front of the mat or jumping with your feet together, you can jump into a squat. And that feels really good, especially if you have a belly or if you've got bigger legs. And I was like, oh, yeah, I like to eat a lot. So that works for
Yeah,
me.
you're like, I need space, I need room. It's so true. A lot, I would say, especially like in kind of crafting or like pulling together like the awakening yoga method, because I hate when everyone's like, I created this. I'm like, none of us, there is not a single fresh thought in the universe. Like, things cannot be created or destroyed. It is all equivalent exchange. So like when we were kind of mapping it, it is all those data points of years of watching people do stuff that you're like, this person in this body cannot do the thing that is asked. And it's not because they don't want to. And it's not because they're not trying. And it's not because they're not showing up every day. It just doesn't work, right? When you get realistic about proportions and the like biodiversity of people, it's crazy talk to expect us to do it the same, look the same, as if we're all going to look like Mr. Iyengar in Light on Yoga. Like, and to at least also, I think for me, I've always been a little bit of a contrarian or like maybe a pessimist sometimes when I'm like, no, like that's great. I'm not going to do that, And so especially like the stepping wide stuff, a lot of that came from like, I'm a doula. I teach pre and postnatal yoga. I've worked with birthing people for a very long time. And the practice just changes, whether you wanted it to or not. You don't have a choice. There's a being in the way. So if you want to keep practicing, you have to change the pose to fit the person and stop trying to change the person to fit the pose. Like, that has always been such an important concept that, especially in workshops, because oftentimes Patrick would be like let's call it like the headliner in festival terms of things. And I am the person who's going to come in and break down a topic. And, I'm assisting and walking around in those days that I would spend hours and days and years just watching people move. And I'm looking around the room and I'm seeing, whatever percentage it can do the things that are being asked. And the other percentage is like dejected and frustrated. And so it's like, for me, that's always been my people. I'm going to go look for the person who's having the toughest time in class and like sit down next to you and like, let's figure it out. Let's find a way through this. And a lot of the stuff that we do has come from that of like, okay, well, there's a lot of people everywhere that are struggling with the same stuff. I want you to feel successful and like you belong in this practice because you do. So why would I keep offering you something that is like, running into a brick wall? It feels at a certain point, and I know that lineage wise, there's a lot of ways why we wanted people to run into a brick wall and to be weeded out of the practice. That's just
really?
not,
Oh,
don't,
tell
I
me
mean,
more.
do you not think that? I've always thought of Ashtanga as this like weed out practice. Like, I've always thought of it as the
Wow.
hardest 101 class in
You're
college.
blowing my mind right now.
It's like, if you can't do it, you can't do it. And they're like, so sad, sorry, right? Like, you take a really hard 101 class in college and it's 1,000 times harder than the 102 and the 103 because they're like, yeah, man, if you can't get through this, you don't belong in the program. And that's how I always look at Ashtanga is like, you can't do it, you can't do it. It's not for you and nobody cares. And it's not all Ashtanga is like a hard ass like that.
They've softened a bit, haven't they? A lot of the teachers I know I've been made it a bit more accessible. There's one teacher I'm thinking of, Adam Keen. He is an Ashtanga, like really, really keen on it. And he's so compassionate and he's so good at like modifying things and he's so open to learning. But I know that there is that other side. I've witnessed it. And I mean, guys, I used to be the biggest Ashtangi fan, so I'm not knocking Ashtanga, but you're right. There were certain things that I could not, I am a heavy lower half per human. Handstand press will not happen for a heavy lower half human. So yeah,
there's just
that
things
is interesting.
That are tough. Like, you can't, I mean, in Ashtanga, as much as I quite value, like sometimes when I don't have any inspiration in my body whatsoever, I'm like, okay, the things that
Let's
ticks, the
go.
boxes I go through is I'm like, I'm going to do the awakening yoga. I'm going to do the solar practice, the set, which is like our kind of set sequence models, or I'm going to do the primary series, or I'm going to go to a Bikram class. Like that container, the structure is important, but the primary series is like crazy talk if you really think about it. Like, so what if my body is naturally predisposed to back bends? Well, I'll never know, because if I'm not naturally predisposed to external hip rotation, I'm never going to get there. I'm never going to get the next pose. I'm never going to get a chance to feel that empowerment success that is actually what keeps people on the mat. Like, if there's anything I believe in after years of like being broken down as an athlete, like, and I will joke about this with my athlete clients, with my friends that have also come from that world, you hit a point as an adult when you stop playing, when you're like, I'm not going to be yelled at by a grown woman anymore. I'm not going to be yelled at by a grown man. I'm not going to have a whistle blown at me. Like, I'm not doing that. So I am such a firm believer now in like positive reinforcement that you can compliment people. You can tell them they're doing a good job. You can give them more without them having done the pre-work, and see what happens. Let them see the possibility, the like potentiality of it. And that's going to inspire them. They don't need to like score 10,000 just to do the next thing. I find that to be so demoralizing, like for me at least.
Yeah.
So the approach, I think weeding people out of a practice that makes people's lives better, it doesn't make any sense to me. If anything, I want to make it easier for you to show up every day and strip away the barriers, because that's how you're going to keep doing it. Why would I want to push you away from something? But I know that's also like a very different perspective than like a classical many years before, where there weren't even a lot of women in the practice, right? If we're being honest.
Yeah. And I'm thinking different people. I mean, this is one of the things that really fascinated me, because on my neuro course, there's lots of different segments. And one of the segments was the skill of teaching. And I mean, the course deliverer, who's the neuroscientist and has worked with many very, very famous professional athletes, one of the things that really blew my mind was him talking about reinforcement and how important that is for beginners, because they don't know how to compare what they're doing to what's right or wrong. They don't have anything to compare it to. So if you tell them when it's good, they're going to be like, oh, okay, that was a good rep. Right, got it. If you just tell them all the time how bad they are, they're going to be like, wow, like it's going to be so demoralizing. But how fascinating is it that actually some people thrive on being told how bad they are? And I thought, wow, in the yoga world, particularly certain styles, people like certain teachers are like, they slam their students. And I'm the opposite. Like if you start talking to me like in an abusive way, I'm out. I'm done. I'm gone. But there are some classes that are really full with these types of teachers. And at first I used to think, okay, maybe it's not totally healthy. But then I heard the teacher speaking about that, and I thought, okay, maybe there's something valuable in it. But I don't know. It'd be great to hear your take on this.
Well, I think it's interesting. I mean, part of it is that same, like, my brain works a lot in like archetypes of people, like, who they are in that moment, in that season of life, what version of them, right? And I think it applies to teachers too. Like, you can show up as a teacher and you can be a healer and a nurturer and a mother and like embody teaching. And you can teach the same concept, I think, as a nurturer and a companion. And you can also teach that same concept as a drill sergeant, right? And as like a more authoritative, like a judge. Like those are different versions. And I think in theory, those can exist in multitudes within the same person. They do, right? But as teachers, we also hopefully at some point are self-aware enough to choose which one we show up as. And it needs to be fitting to the students in front of you, right? Like it is kind of the beauty of private clients and things like that, because I have plenty of experience in those phases. I can show up as the drill sergeant. Like I can make you do it. I can talk shit and banter with you. It's why I'm really comfortable in like athletic environments with trainers and more like aggro, stereotypically masculine places. Cause like, if you want to give me shit for not putting enough weight on the bar, like no problem. I'm gonna give you shit right back. And then I will put more weight on the bar and I will do it. Right. Like I love to prove people wrong. I am petty like that. And so there are environments where I do fully understand that approach. And sometimes I need the tough love. But I also know that like there were points in my life where I thought I needed tough love everywhere. I thought that was like also what I needed on the mat. And like in retrospect, or when I take a recount of my mental state at the time, like I didn't. It's just all that I knew. Like if all you know is that that's how people show love, or that's how teachers teach you, is to break you down, then yeah, you're going to respond to it because you don't know anything else. And you just might be surprised when you realize when someone like sits with you and actually holds your hand through the process, or sees you, or, can at least just bear witness to the challenge of the practice, that might work for you too, And I think a lot of people just maybe they don't know. And hopefully along the path of practice, you get to know yourself better, or you take many different teachers and lineages and you see how differently you exist in all those buckets. But I think general population who hasn't spent a lot of time just even inquiring, like we spend so much of our life just disassociating on purpose. We're like, I don't want to know what's happening. But then we come to yoga and we just let a teacher tell us how it's supposed to be because we don't know any better, right?
But that's, I guess, part of disassociating as well. Like, a part of me wonders if potentially people who gravitate towards teachers who have got a really abusive adjustment style or verbal style maybe come from abuse themselves, and that's what they know, and that's what's home for them.
Mm-hmm. I think it's hard, like in what we do, because there's so much permeation and crisscross between the physicality and the mental side and the spiritual side. And there's so much like therapizing in this, myself included, that like you want to understand people. At least I assume you're the same. I want to understand why you move the way you move, how your body works. But I also want to like understand, like, why did you choose it that way? Why are your patterns like this? So you had an injury here and you're afraid of that still. Okay, so you're still making that choice here. Or like respectfully, you grew up in a very avoidant household and no one hugged each other, no one said I love you. Like, okay, well, that's also going to show up in how you respond to teaching, how you show up as a teacher, how you handle adjustments, how you interact with your community and your students. Like, it's not a right or wrong, but it's so naive to think that all those multifaceted things aren't turning into the amalgamation that is like you as a practitioner or you as a student. I'm going to say nothing has shown me that more than being a parent and watching my daughter be who she is and watching visceral reactions to like other kids, to me, to her dad, to different styles of parenting, watching her like she's a little cancer baby, like an empath at her core. She could pick up a change in the tone of voice from a million miles away. She'll be like, Mom, why is your voice a little slower and a little quieter? Is everything okay? Like, she's 5, right? But I can see her do that. And I can see how she recoils to certain types of communication and really leans into others in just a more, I don't want to say genuine, but like, she's unencumbered still. She's only 5. So you see how that's just a natural response that as adults, we've developed a million mechanisms to either, reinforce what we've always done or try to, lean into other stuff. And yoga is like this fucking stripped bare naked thing. You're on a mat. There's nothing else happening. You're locked in a room. You're sweaty. You're breathing. You're not supposed to talk. Like all those old tendencies from when you're 5 and 6 and a kid. I really do think a lot of that shit shows up on the mat because you can't like hide behind much else, right?
Yeah.
And, you gravitate towards who you gravitate towards, I think a lot of times because that's the thing that at your core, maybe you feel safest or at least more comfortable doing because it feels familiar.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, so much wisdom. I wanted to kind of take a step away from yoga just briefly. I'm sure we'll circle back to it, but I know that you have quite a dynamic practice. And in terms of you do loads of other things outside of yoga. I know that you're a keen lifter and you're running. Is there anything else that you do that I'm not aware of? And also, how's that informed you as a person, as a practitioner, as a teacher?
I would say, yes, I do a lot of things. One, I am just sort of like a pinging off the wall person, not necessarily always physically, but in my brain. Like I said, I need to get out of my head into my body. So I will say yes to almost any kind of movement thing. Like one of my favorite things about travel and teaching was that I loved landing in a new city and being like, what weird fitness classes are there here? What weird boutique? Like I love going to New York and being like, okay, I'm gonna plan my day.
What's the weirdest one?
What's the weirdest one? I'm gonna take 3 overpriced, but it's a business expense. I'm gonna take 3 weird yoga, fitness, something. I'm gonna try every studio, every teacher. And like, at this point, I'm very confident in my ability to like discern when I show up to something, is this gonna work? How am I gonna exist in this class? But I love that so much that truly I could be talked into trying anything. Almost anything. I'll say almost anything. I need to feel like there's some potential that I won't make a fool of myself. But like, I just love doing that. I love the experience of it. And in that, the main thing I do aside from yoga is I spend a lot of time in like an athletic performance gym, and I work in, mobility. So let's call it asana adjacent oftentimes, sometimes conflated, right? I have a dear friend who just opened up a wonderful spin studio down the street for me. I love the cardio feeling. It's not my favorite when I'm doing it, but that euphoria after you've like actually done some cardio, you're like,
Yeah.
oh man,
Free
life
drugs.
is great. Free drugs. The sun is brighter. Like the sounds are clearer. That I also recently put a pole in my apartment, which is just off camera. And I've been taking pole dancing classes for the last couple of years. Like,
They're so painful though. How do you do it?
oh, it's hard. It's the most humbling version. Like, I love to dance. This is not commentary on how good I am at dancing, even though I've done it for a long time, but like, I'm so happy and euphoric to be like literally sweaty on a dance floor at midnight. And I feel like spin classes with loud music and pole classes are my now 37-year-old version of like, I would like to be at the club.
Okay. Like, yogis at the club on the bike with the headband.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's like, for me, pole is so dynamic and so physical. It's like
it's so painful.
I'm covered in bruises. My legs look like trash. It's horrible, but it just is also.
You just got to do it.
It's cathartic too. Like, think about what we do in yoga, where whether it's freedom of awakening yoga or structure of Ashtanga, is still yoga. There's still a lot of celibacy and cleanliness and cleansing and like purity. And I think there's something so freeing about something that doesn't have to be that way, and allowing yourself to exist in multitude. Same with going to the gym and lifting weights. Like, yeah, you can be mad, throw some shit around. Like, you have to work through stuff in different ways. And yoga may not be the right tool for the task on any given day. It's just like, hopefully one of the most powerful tools in your tool bag, right? But you have to choose the right one.
There used to be a lot of expectation. I know that I used to feel it as a yoga practitioner, and it's evolved a lot. And I feel like for a long time, I've been beating this drum, like, guys, we have to cross train. And I got so much hate for it. But now people are actually cross training, and I'm like, yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for years it was, and certainly still in some circles, like, you only do yoga. And I did that for a very long time. It's something that Patrick and I have lamented over many, many times over the last 15 years, that like, to get where we are and to be as deep in the practice as we are as practitioners and teachers, we both needed those years of yoga is everything, right? Of also the heyday of like 90-minute, 2-hour practices every single day. Like, this is what you do, eat, breathe, sleep it. Like, that was really important for building up the bulk of the experience and, the patterns and just my repertoire within yoga and my dedication to it. But it's the worst my body's ever felt, right? When I was only doing yoga at all times. And it's the most injuries that I had, right? And it's not because yoga was injuring me. It's because the lack of diversity, the lack of load, like my tissues' unhappiness generally with the overall repetition at that extreme level. It's not to say you can't do yoga every day. It's just to say that it's so naive to believe that that's all our body needs from a physical standpoint. Like,
Absolutely.
if you're happy and you only want to do yoga, you totally can. It's just that there are physical demands that just unfortunately can't be fulfilled by the yoga practice, whether we want it to or not.
Absolutely. When you start learning about, you were talking about injuries, when you start learning about pain neuroscience and how actually pain works in the body, and you're like, oh, there was no novelty, and how important novelty is in our ability to process threat in our environments. And then I think coupled to that, which kind of compounds the issue, is the safety culture, which made sure that we, only follow the rules. We've spoken about alignment cues, but then you're invariably going to be playing with your dog and doing a funny chaturanga, reaching for a ball underneath the sofa. And then suddenly you're going to be like, oh, no, I've done the wrong thing. Oh, that's why my shoulder hurts. And you're like, your shoulder's okay. I think it's just a belief system that you're kind of has underpinned your, your whole being as a person moving through this life.
It's crazy how, it's just, I think we both believe in this and like really adhere to the idea that like nothing works alone, right? The thought that just how we physically move is the only thing that impacts pain. Like there are no studies that prove that. Like most of the research shows us that pain exists whether or not there's anything happening in the body, that pain is largely like a mental thing. And I think in yoga, sometimes we run with that in the wrong way, and we run with it in a way of like positive thinking and affirmations, and you can just think your way out of things, like, and just keep doing it, it'll go away, right? And it can go the other direction where we're actually ignoring that there are very real inputs or adjustments that could be made to help alleviate pain, because we, maybe need to add other inputs like additional strength or more tolerance or variability and novelty. Because like, yeah, something
Absolutely.
hurts, and every day, I'm going to have to wake up in the morning and do that thing that hurts. And then tomorrow I'm going to wake up in the morning and do that thing that hurts. Like,
Mm.
yes, up here we're like, yeah, man, my body and my life hurts. And that's very different than the novelty of suddenly doing something and realizing, oh, I did that and it didn't hurt. And there's
Mm.
like, that is a very important wire to connect, that you could do a rep, you could do a thing, and it's pain free. That means a lot
Mm.
for the next sets, the next reps, the next movements.
Yeah, in neurology, we always say you need to train the brain to experience one pain-free rep, and then you know for a
Yes.
fact that it's a possibility. And as
Mm-hmm.
soon as you've done that, that puts you on the path of being able to rehab effectively. So I'm so glad that you mentioned that. What are some of the weirdest things that you've learned recently, and some of the trainings that you've taken that you were like, wow, I used to think this, and now I think this, and it's so much more empowering thinking this new way because of this new education that I've received.
I mean, I love, for someone who like I'm a person who in real life gets easily embarrassed. Like, I drop my change at the cashier, things like that. I'm like, oh God, I want to die. I want to crawl in a hole. Like, but for some reason, that version of me and the version of me in learning that like would love to be wrong all the time, I'm like, yes, like teach me something new, blow my mind, break an old misconception. I want to learn that new. Like I want to be all the time. I want to be wrong about something, because that means there's like a new paradigm. There's something new to obsess over. And I think the big things of the last like few years that I've really been into, or just like that have expanded my vision, is spending a lot more time in other systems of the body that aren't just musculoskeletal. Like,
Mm.
in yoga and especially in alignment, we spend so much time, and in biomechanics mobility, like you're working with tissue adaptation. That's the goal, when you're trying to help people with range of motion, that's the goal. But the systems beyond that
Oh, the
are
ones in charge.
so fascinating, and turns out they matter way more, right? It blew my
Yeah.
mind when I just like even stepped out. Like, of course I knew they existed. I like have a background in anatomy and kinesiology and all that, but I hadn't ever placed them appropriately on like the scale of importance or impact, that I find it so freeing to look at something not just of a standpoint of like hypertrophy or range of motion, and instead like, what's the blood flow? Okay, how are we going to work through this injury? How's the blood flow? How's your lymph moving? Like those are things, and also from a neurological perspective, like, okay, how are we approaching this? What type of tolerance are we building up? That's not just time under tension, but like the mental side of those things,
Mm.
that, it's so fascinating. We deal with breath as like our only other additional system, in
Mm.
yoga. And then we put everything in the subtle body character category, which is huge
Yeah.
and vast and often replicates the other systems that we're talking about in, the circulatory system and all that jazz. But just like shifting focus there, especially when I work with people in the mobility world or in recovery stuff with athletes, it's like they come to me and they think we're going to stretch and we're going to do mobility and strengthen. And I'm going to sit there and I'm going to talk to you about blood flow and lymph for half the time, because it's such a huge component. And we just, we don't even address it because we assume it's just happening. It's like the breath. We're like, yeah, blood's flowing, things are moving. What else? We don't realize how paramount it is to literally everything.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is what has been, it's been at the forefront of really the last, I'd say, 5 years of completely changing a very biomechanically minded angle that I came from, to suddenly realizing, oh, okay, so the nervous system's in charge. And for the nervous system to function well, we need to remove the toxins via the lymph, and we need adequate blood flow to get the nerves to fire. And then the nerves could become entrapped. So we need to like make sure that we can floss them adequately. Oh, all these other pieces of the puzzle matter way more than your muscles and your bones and your joints. And then, but then what comes with that, I don't know if you ever feel this, is the frustration when you hear people talking about, the reason your knees are bad is because of your joint health, and you need to be doing your certain special range
Mhm.
of motion drills or you're going to
Mhm.
keep being in pain. And I'm like, oh, this is like so 20 years ago, guys. Like, let's get
Mhm.
update your information.
Well, and it's like, yeah, maybe. Or maybe like that's this much piece of the pie, right? But it's like we
Exactly. It's a
think that,
puzzle.
yeah, we think that it's everything, and I think that there's this misconception that general maintenance and the things you do for your body to just like hopefully keep them going, putting oil in your car, like all those things, we misconstrue that for like injury prevention or rehab. And
Mm.
some of it is like, you should just be doing this shit because you sat for 8 hours, like as a computer programmer. You should just be doing daily cars because, yeah, man, you haven't moved your knee today, or like your wrists have been doing this, so you should do it. But it's not a substitute for like the larger ecosystem of everything else, because I also want you to get up and hop around for a while. Like I want you to shake it out. I want you to do like TRE type shaking stuff. I want you to understand that like if you never do anything with your feet and your calves, it's going to fuck with your whole blood flow system. Like your calves are the second
Mm.
heart of your body. But in yoga, we do very little or very weird versions of plyometrics in yoga. And we forget that that's not just like training for hoopers. That's not just training for track stars. Like that is for everyone. That's very important to move it all through. And, I do sometimes wonder, I don't know if you feel similar. Actually, I'm very curious, like how long I can call what I do and what I teach yoga,
Mm.
from
It's
a
very
perspective
hard
of,
for me. It's been
do you
very hard
struggle
for
too with
me.
that?
Well, also because, I think I get judged quite harshly because I have such a unique approach. I mean, I'm making people do vision drills and vestibular drills, and the impact that that then has on their splits is so profound.
Yes.
And yeah, and I mean, look, I've always come from a slightly weird angle, so there's always been a lot of backlash about that. But I think now more than ever, it's tricky. It is tricky.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna keep going because I believe in what I do, but I do feel the tension,
Mm-hmm.
especially in certain places more than others.
Well, and I don't feel the tension in that like it shouldn't be being done, but I do, and I don't feel a tension in like necessarily like backlash in like the way that it was in like the olden days of yoga blogs and things like that, or at least like maybe I just don't look at anything anymore. I don't check it, I don't read it. But I do sometimes, you know, there's always the undertone, and I know with you too, like there's an undertone, there's a foundation of yoga and like the approach to it, the brain space around it, the language that's being used. But I also think that I know I'm never going to just teach strictly yoga, not because I
Mm,
don't think it's valuable or worthwhile, but I just think that like I know too much now to
yeah,
pretend that when I see people, I don't have other things that I know could help or that I think would be interesting, that I just like I can't help myself but offer them. I don't
totally.
know how to turn it
But
off anymore.
I mean, what kind of gets me is when we listen to the history of yoga and we start to recognize that so much of the yoga that is traditionally accepted as being the correct way is not that old. And it's
No.
influenced by so many different disciplines, such as gymnastics. And
Mhm.
so a little voice inside my head is like, well, maybe things should keep evolving. And that's a positive thing. Like maybe a lot
Mhm.
of the stuff that we're doing now, that we're learning about the brain, used to be done years ago, but we lost that data. Maybe there was Patanjali's 2.0 sutras that weren't discovered because they're
Mhm.
underneath a rock somewhere and they haven't been dug up yet. And a part of me just feels like, couldn't we embrace some of the new things? And I mean, the body's old, right? The body's evolved all these amazing mechanisms over millennia. So that is the real yoga,
Mhm.
our evolution since the time began.
Yeah.
And it would be a shame just to park that because 150 years ago we were told to do sun cell A and sun cell B, and that's the real yoga. And I get shit all the time for people saying, "Oh, what you do is not real yoga." I'm like, come on,
Mhm.
you need to move your eyes. Like this is
Mhm.
old stuff when you were picking
It's
trees out of picking fruit from a tree.
Yes. This is, I think, the misconception a lot of times because we use the terms classical and traditional oftentimes. And I am always kind of like interchanging the two and being like, okay, which one's going to get my point across that like this stuff isn't that old. And that's not to discredit that yoga is that old and that profound and that big. It absolutely is. But the asana practice is not. And the asana practice has been this collectivism of like, what's going to be most accepted in the West when we bring in this over here, right? And it makes sense that there's an intersection of like physical fitness and aerobics and gymnastics and even like versions of Indian bodybuilding that were a part of it, right? And at the same time, prostration and reverence and pushing a rock around a giant mountain as part of prayer. Like when you look at sun salutations, like circumnavigation, all these things make it this really fascinating intersection of practices. And I think because I'm such like you, an it depends person or a tell me more person, I hate the black and whiteness of like, it's not this, it's this. I do agree that it can't be everything because, right, like if it's everything, it's nothing. I don't love when people are like, my running is my yoga, my walking is my yoga, my boxing is my yoga. I will never understand saying namaste after a soul cycle class as if like, what, like, that's the same permeation and somehow, we have to find a way to separate mindfulness and wellness practices from like a discipline of yoga. But I don't think that means that we have to pretend like the yoga asana practice is the end all be all version of having this in your life, right? Or of attending to things, because we put so much weight on yoga, right? We're like, okay, fix my injuries. Can you fix my marriage? Can you cure my depression? Also, could you help me lose weight? Could you alleviate my back pain? I'd like to touch my toes. I'd like to be faster. I'd like to be happier and nicer to my kids. Like, it is lofty. That is not fair for the practice, right? We can say that it can do some things and it can't do others. And now I need something to do those other things, right? But I think that it's not like I feel there's a yoga police coming after me ever, but I do sometimes look at what I teach and I'm like, oh, this 20-minute chunk was me dropped into my yoga teacher, archetype teacher. And this 20-minute block was me on a tangent about how, yeah, in order to get to this peak pose, you know what, we could do yoga asana, but a more effective way to get there during this class is going to be mobility. A more effective way to get to this thing is going to be X, Y, and Z, right? Yoga is not designed to be efficient. That's not the point, right? But if we live in a world where we are trying to work towards something or facilitate a goal or rehab or something, then at a certain point, you have to be more realistic about what the right path is. And it's not always going to be do yoga 5 days a week. There's a more efficient, effective way. It's like learning handstands through yoga always makes me giggle because like we love it in yoga, but is going to vinyasa yoga classes and hoping you're going to learn how to press handstand the best way to get there? Like, no, man. You go to a circus school and learn that shit in 6 months, right? You can go to gymnastics. There's a 6-year-old who's better than you at it already. It's lovely to do it that way, but we can't pretend like it's the most efficient or most effective to do the things that we ask it to do these days. It's
I
not.
love
It's setting ourselves up for like sad expectations or failed expectations.
I love that you just said we're putting a lot of pressure on poor little yoga to tick so many boxes. I'm so glad you said that because I've never thought about it like that. But you're right. I think it is. It's probably wildly out of the realms of what the practice has to offer. Let's talk. Well, we're running out of time, so we can't talk too much more, but I might get you back because I think there's more sciencey stuff because this is, of course, Love at First Science. I first wanted to just get to know you and us have like a general chat. Let's get together again and let's geek out mega mode next time. What do you think?
That's my dream. So happy to always
geek out
for as long
brilliant.
as you
I think after this, let's chat about what we can geek out about in the mega mode, and then let's make that the chat. But just before I usually close off the conversations, I always put people on the spot and I ask them, if you had one message for the world, what would your message be?
Ooh. Okay, my big one, this is a piece of advice that I got when I was pregnant. Like everyone loves to give pregnant people all sorts of advice about what it's like to have a kid, and the one that stuck with me that has forever, and I have applied it across motherhood and teaching and everything, is with a newborn, that won't sleep and things are chaotic. And it's simply go easy on them. They're new here. Right. And with a baby, it's so easy to be like, why won't you sleep? Why are you doing this to me? To think that it's like this pointed, like, I just need this, that, and the other, or why is this so hard? And then you look at them and they're new here. They're trying to figure it out. They don't know either. And you apply it to yourself as a new mother. Hey, I'm new here. I'm trying to figure it out.
Oh.
You give yourself grace. And I think with teaching, with practicing, with everything is like, whether you're actually new there or not, like whether it's your first class or a thousands class teaching or practicing, like go easy on yourself. You're new here, right? Like it's always this experience of trying to pull back and give yourself or give others some grace. And it's so much easier said than done. I think it shows up in relationships, right? You get in a relationship with someone new and they do a thing that you're not used to or communicate in a way that you're not used to. And it's so easy to be like, how dare they not know? This must be pointed. This must be whatever. And it's like, you can go easy. You're both new here. Like you're navigating it. So for me, I try to like approach all of my teaching like that. It's easier for me to do it in teaching than in like regular life. Obviously it's harder when it's your personal self versus your job. But I try to approach it that way, that like in every class, you know, like, hey, you're new here, whether you just woke up or, you know, you're literally new here, like, okay, let's figure it out together. And, you know, there's a lot of hopefully grace and patience in the process, and less pressure or less personalization of it. So that's when I wish I knew who said it to me, but it's like the only piece of advice I would ever give new mothers and new teachers when they come out of teacher training and they're trying to figure it out. Yes.
Yeah.
We're so hard on ourselves. It's, you know, me too. I'm very hard on myself. We all are. We all like the rules apply to everyone except for me. But as a reminder, I think it's a nice way to come back to it without it being overly intense or prescriptive. Like it's just a general tone. I think it's helpful. It's helped me a lot.
I think that's great. You're so wise. And so where can people find out more about you and indulge in more of your epic wisdom?
Well, if you want to practice with me or train with me, you can find everything at awakeningyogaacademy.com or on Instagram. So Awakening Yoga is the method, the style, the system. You know, it stems from a mishmash of vinyasa, Shanga, Angar, like all of all of the things that are made up me and Patrick as teachers have turned into this version that we have, you know, let's call it co-created. So we have in-person trainings, we have online trainings. I travel and do events. I've got like a mobility meets asana workshop coming up in Germany and some retreats happening in the Philippines over the next 6 months. So you can find me on the road. You can find me online. You can find me on Instagram at Carling Nicole. Honestly, like shockingly too many places on the internet. I usually tell people I meet, I'm like, please don't Google me. Don't do it. Don't Google me. I don't want you to go there.
Oh, now you made me want to Google you.
But if you want to work with me, then yeah, you should definitely Google me because that's where all the information is.
Carling Harps, guys.
Yes,
Google,
that's the one.
Google the crap out of this girl.
Yeah, but don't click you just don't go too far, right? Because you know it's a dangerous place out there.
It is. I mean, you used to work in tech, so you know you could always just utilize those skills, get in there and see what kind of hacking you could do.
Yeah, I wish I still had those. I like to think that I'm still savvy, but I don't know if it's true.
You've got a lot on your plate. I think deal with what you're dealing with now. It's not going to be too bad. Thank you so much for coming on Love at First Science, Carling. I can't wait to have you back. You're a real gem, and I'll see you soon.
Thank you so much for having me. It was lovely.